Hello, and welcome to this deep dive and retrospective on our beloved green hero, Shrek. This will be the first installment of a series where I'll be unpacking and examining the characters, themes, and development of the Shrek franchise. I haven't seen these movies in years, so this was a great excuse to dive back into such an amazing series, and I cannot wait to talk to you all about it. There will be spoilers ahead, though this movie is very popular and over 20 years old. So I doubt there's many Shrek versions out there. With that courtesy out of the way, sit back. This is going to be a long story. During my research for this analysis, I found scattered quotes from the directors of the movie that I think spell out the themes and thesis pretty clearly. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the CEO of DreamWorks, said Shrek kind of looks at all the fairy tale traditions we grew up on backwards and takes great fun turning all those storytell conventions upside down and inside out. Vicki Jensen, a story director, explains the story is about self acceptance and that things aren't always as they appear. Her and another story director, Andrew Adamson, argued about how much adult humor should be in the movie, with Adamson being the pusher for more adult based jokes and scenes. I think their dichotomy adds another interesting layer to the movie, one that makes Shrek walk the line between adult and kid enjoyment. Video will be segmented into 4 sections: production, plot, characters, and final thoughts. Through this analysis, I hope to discuss how well the directors of Shrek achieved their goals for the movie, and what worked and didn't work with the themes and characters to help them achieve their thesis of not your typical fairy tale. A spoiler for this video, there's not many things that I don't think work for this movie. It's almost perfect. Shrek's production tale begins as far back as 1991, 10 years before the movie was released in theaters. Steven Spielberg bought the rights to the original children's book Shrek by William Steig. John H. Williams would eventually convince Spielberg to give the production rights to the still young DreamWorks Studios in 1994, and the production would begin in 1995 with Williams, along with Jeffrey Katzenberg, I cannot get his name right, and Aaron Warner. Williams pitched the idea after his 2 young children started quoting the book, pretending they could read it. In 1997, the then voice actor for Shrek, Chris Farley, would unfortunately die right before finishing his recording of the character. Mike Myers would then be called to do the voice acting, where he would also get close to finishing his recording before deciding he wanted Shrek to have a Scottish accent. Isn't that fun? And it was reminiscent of his own father's. He opted to redo all of the recordings with the accent after a few successful takes. Along with the many re recordings of the title character, animation was another issue. Shrek was originally going to be animated using motion capture CGI, but after a year and a half and an unsatisfactory test showing, production decided to switch to their partners at Pacific Data Images, who helped the company with their 1998 animated horror movie, Ants. That movie was fucking scary. Shrek was first shown at the Man Village Theater in 2001, and then would be entered into the Cannes Film Festival and would be the first animated film to win since Disney's Peter Pan in 1953. Shrek would end up earning $500 million on a $60 million budget. Shrek would also win an Academy Award for the Best Animated Feature, beating Jimmy Neutron and even Monsters Incorporated. Go Shrek. A little side note, in this Academy Awards, they animated the nominated characters into the video of the attending audience. So, like, when they were saying the names, you could see the characters in the crowd, like, clapping along and looking excited. It was so cool. I wonder if they had reserved seats for the green screen. Can you imagine? Sorry, those seats are reserved for Shrek and Donkey, the animated characters. Anyway, Shrek was released in theaters May 18th, 2001, and thus begins the story of Shrek. Now we're moving on to the plot section. If you've seen the movie recently and don't want to recap, feel to skip ahead. I talk a little bit about the analysis throughout the plot, but I'm trying to save a lot of it for later. Shrek begins with the classic looking fairy tale book being read to the audience by our main hero. The fairy tale itself is a foreshadowing for the rest of the plot to come. Very typical fairy tale stuff, right? But the directors use this opening to let the audience know this will not be your typical fairy tale, as after reading the story, Shrek rips out the last page of the book and uses it as toilet paper. We then get our full introduction to our green hero when he kicks open his outhouse door to the opening verse of Smash Mouth's hit song, All Star. A montage ensues showing Shrek doing his day to day, and for the most part, he's just a bachelor living his best life. He eats, bathes, brushes his teeth, and scares away would be angry mobs of villagers from his house, as we all do. We also get the sense Shrek is profoundly lonely, as we all are. But more on that later, because in this next scene, we meet Donkey as he's being sold out by his guardian to the Knights of Duloc for being a fairy tale creature. This whole scene is so funny and silly while also being completely horrific if you think about the scene for more than a second. Like, families are being split apart, witches and fairies and gnomes are in shackles and cages. Fairy tale characters from our childhood are being sold and imprisoned for a handful of gold. This is the first example of the directors walking the line between adult themes and a children's movie, and is a brilliant introduction to that line. Donkey and Shrek meet after this, and it's an instant one sided friendship, or it seems that way. Shrek is more than capable of getting rid of Donkey if he wanted to, but he lets him stay. It's because Shrek understands Donkey doesn't find him scary, but more on that later because it's just so good, and I haven't even gotten through introducing all the characters yet. So, Shrek goes home, makes Donkey sleep outside, but as he's having dinner, more fairy tale characters, the one from Donkey's introduction, start appearing in Shrek's home. Shrek goes outside and finds that a group of refugees had set up camp in his swamp. He needs to fix this. He needs his solitude. He finds out who's responsible and where to find him, and he and Donkey go to meet the racist, perverted, very tiny Lord Farquaad. Farquaad has one of the vilest openings in all of cinema. Shrek does not pull punches with how evil their villains are. We meet Farquaad as he's interrogating the gingerbread man, Gingy. This man is literally waving Gingy's disembodied legs in front of him while mocking his nursery rhyme. Then he throws Gingy's own legs at his face. Anyway, we move on as we see he's got his hands on the magic mirror from Snow White's story, and this is how we first meet Fiona. This man asks for all the eligible princesses who need a knight to come save them so he can become a king. And Fiona is one of those options, and obviously, for plot's sake, she is the one he picks. Donkey and Shrek interrupt a contest Farquaad is holding to find a champion that will go and get Fiona from the tower for him. Shrek beats all of Farquaad's close combat knights, and Farquaad demands Shrek get Fiona for the deed to his swamp back. Shrek agrees. We get the famous ogres are like onions, they have layers quote from Shrek, and then they're at Fiona's tower. Donkey accidentally meets the dragon, then accidentally seduces the dragon, while Shrek and the audience officially meet Fiona. And immediately we understand she is obsessed with the idea of her fairy tale ending, but we'll unpack Fiona's entire terrifyingly sad story later. Our three heroes escape with the dragon crying in the distance. Then Fiona finds out her handsome knight is an ogre. Her reaction to Shrek's form is negative, and Shrek is clearly hurt by this reaction. To disguise this and to go against Fiona's stubborn refusal to go with them, Shrek picks Fiona up and begins to carry her back to Farquaad. At sunset, Fiona insists on finding a place to stay, and we find out Fiona is an ogre herself, and she is in fact the princess in the opening fairy tale. But we also get the best Shrek and Donkey scene in the whole series, and I can't wait to fully unpack everything about it. This scene between them is so touching that Fiona, having eavesdropped on the convo, tries to see Shrek as a person, not as a monster like she fears herself to be. And they start to fall in love as we witness the grossest and yet still somehow adorable montage of them enjoying each other's company. I can't decide what's worse, the spiderweb fly cotton candy or the impossible frog balloon because I fucking hate frogs. But it's so cool that the whole scene is just a stereotypical love montage, but gross to fit the ogres. And it's such good writing when it comes to working the movie's thesis. The last act of the movie we'll speed through because it's a lot of nuance that we can talk about in length later. Fiona insists they spend another night. Donkey finds out she's an ogre and plays Shrek's best wingman while also consoling the princess. Shrek overhears Fiona say, "Who can love a gross, disgusting ogre?" She was talking about herself, but Shrek doesn't hear that part. Shrek gets Farquaad, who takes Fiona back to his castle. Shrek gets his swamp deed and ends his friendship with Donkey. We get a sad montage of Shrek and Fiona missing each other. Then we find Donkey being Donkey and annoying Shrek until he confesses his feelings. Donkey fixes the misunderstanding and they go to stop the wedding. They get there a few seconds too late to say, "I object," but Shrek interrupts the wedding anyways. He confesses his love for Fiona, who returns it after revealing her secret. Donkey summons his dragon girlfriend again, who eats Farquaad in one bite. Shrek and Fiona kiss, and the spell is broken. Kind of. Because Fiona is still an ogre. But she realizes the spell was written with specific words. By night one way, by day another. This shall be norm until you find true love's first kiss, and then take true love's form. The curse never said she'd be full human again. just that she will take true love's form. And yeah, they live happily ever after, the movie ending with the misplaced fairy tale characters having a party at Shrek and Fiona's wedding while Donkey sings I'm a Believer by the Monkees and the credits roll. Now, with the basic plot out of the way, we can really dive into the characters and themes. I'm only going to talk about the characters and how they behave and grow in this movie alone. I will only mention a few scenes from Shrek 2 as it is very relevant to what I'll be talking about when we get to those parts. And for these sections, I think I want to pair the characters with different themes. Like, for starters, let's talk about Shrek and parody. Shrek himself is probably the most interesting fairy tale prince we've ever seen in animated movies. His whole character design is a parody on the archetypal hero. He's chunky, green, and has the weirdest ears. He isn't eloquent, he curses and farts religiously, and for decades, marketing teams have been trying and failing to make Shrek cute for some reason. But he's just not, and that's great because he's literally not supposed to be. From start to finish, to every detail about this movie and its characters, the directors focused on the idea, on their thesis, not your typical fairy tale. They did this for Shrek and his story while also remarkably maintaining the tried and true fairy tale beats. Hero and animal companion get a quest to save the princess. Bandits attack on the journey back. Hero gets injured and princess treats him. Hero and princess fall in love as they journey together. They defeat their biggest threat to their happiness and they live happily ever after. Just think about how well that describes the basic plot of almost every fairy tale romance movie. They even started the movie with a stereotypical fairy tale book opening, but again, everything is a parody. The book becomes the hero's toilet paper. The hero isn't a handsome prince, and he goes to save the princess for very selfish reasons that have nothing to do with her. The animal companion isn't just comedy relief, but actually plays an integral part in the emotional development of the two legged MCs. The whole movie is actually sad and lovely and deeper than what its colorfully animated surface would have you believe, and the only reason it could be called a children's movie is the lack of blood and the ending with the wedding party. Shrek's line about having layers is so true, and his deeper emotional conflict is what also parodies him from the typical one note fairy tale prince. Another theme that's closely tied to Shrek's character is friendship. It's through his friendship with Donkey that he develops the most throughout the movie. Yes, one can argue Shrek's romantic relationship with Fiona is a huge step for Shrek, which it is, but the impact of that connection is lessened when we look at why they fell in love versus how Shrek and Donkey became friends. Shrek and Fiona are very similar. They share several mannerisms: belching, farting, eating things most people wouldn't, and finding it good. They're both gross as fuck, and they're both ogres. Donkey and Shrek, however, are very different people. Donkey is fun loving and sings about friendship. Shrek is generally sarcastic and crass and doesn't like people randomly singing. Donkey is the only friend Shrek has ever had, and therefore the best. I also want to point out that Shrek takes a beat before giving Donkey his name, and while some believe he's just making up a name on the spot, I believe it's because it's been so long since Shrek has used his name out loud that it took him a moment to remember how to say it. The animators deserve so many flowers for the amount of emotions they convey on the green egg shaped creature with weird ears. You can see in Shrek's face how surprised he is at Donkey's lack of fear when he does his ogre yell that makes normal people shit themselves. And after that moment of realization, he stops trying to get Donkey away from him. This is so big for him. He's letting someone into his swamp, and that person didn't even care he was an ogre. It doesn't even seem to register to Donkey that he's anything but a new friend. Not even Fiona offers him a good reaction when she first sees his face. And because of all of this, Shrek is genuinely hurt when Donkey insinuates that Shrek could have slaughtered Farquaad's entire kingdom, but he took the deal instead. He gets defensive, and when he gets defensive, he starts saying bombastically violent things, or he starts doing things in an aggressive manner. He does it when he meets Fiona, lifting her over his shoulder. He does this at the dinner table with her parents in the second movie, and he does it here with Donkey. And he ends his violent spiel about burning and gutting with, "Does that sound like a good time?" And Donkey, now humbled, agrees that Shrek taking the deal was the better choice. And Shrek hits us with the onion line. Okay, he's trying to articulate a complex thing to someone for the first time in his life. He chose a good enough analogy. I'm going to leave him alone now. My favorite scene in the whole movie is when Donkey and Shrek are sitting together that first night while Fiona's in the cave. Shrek is telling Donkey stories about constellations. First, I have to ask, how does Shrek know these stories? Did he have a childhood similar to what his children have? Or did he make these stories up during his years of solitude? It might actually be that Shrek is well read, at least in fairy tales and folklore. This is hinted at a few times throughout the movie, Shrek having Fiona's book at the beginning being the most obvious. Then, when a mob member in the beginning says that ogres grind bones into bread, Shrek corrects him, saying that's actually giants. Then, in Fiona's tower, he recalls that princesses are typically kept in the highest room of the tallest tower. Then, of course, this moment of him recounting the tales of stars to Donkey. However, Shrek came upon this knowledge, Donkey is probably the first person he has ever told these stories to. And that's why I want to analyze this scene. Donkey says, "Man, that ain't nothing but a bunch of little dots." As Shrek responds, "Sometimes things are more than they appear," and his face falls. I wonder if he's remembering Fiona's reaction to seeing his face. Or maybe he's remembering his failed attempt at explaining himself to Donkey with the onion. Maybe he's realizing he spent who knows how long telling stories with another person, and he's suddenly confronted with how good it felt and how different he might be to the person he thinks himself to be, which is always a scary realization. He's lived a life of self fulfilling prophecy until this moment, only knowing solitude and rage because that's what he's been told ogres are his entire life. And this belief is only reinforced with every interaction Shrek has ever had up until meeting Donkey. Shrek was put into this role since birth. He finds comfort in the familiar, as many of us do. And now with Donkey, it's the first time he is confronted with the notion that he doesn't have to be the big, scary ogre. He can be anything he wants to be, and that freedom is terrifying, and he begins to shut down. Unfortunately for Shrek, Donkey chooses to confront him as well. Maybe on purpose to provoke this identity crisis within Shrek, maybe it's just a happy accident, but either way, Donkey mentions the swamp and calls it theirs. Shrek can't take it and shuts Donkey out, saying something mean, calling back on the angry ogre trope to try and find safety. He knows he says something hurtful to Donkey and hides his shame by rolling over. But this is Donkey. We've already established angry ogre tricks don't work on him, and he starts talking and pushing. Shrek pushes back. He puts steel in his voice, but Donkey isn't afraid of Shrek, so he keeps digging. "Who are you trying to keep out, Shrek? Tell me, who?" And Shrek breaks. His ears drop again. "Everyone, okay?" And Donkey reveals he wanted this breakthrough all along. Now we're getting somewhere. And this bit is another example of DreamWorks ballet dancing the line between adult emotions in kids' movies. Donkey's silliness and his delivery of "now we're getting somewhere" completely cuts the emotional impact of Shrek's confession. But he delivers it after giving the confession a moment to hang in the air, letting the audience breathe in the scene before letting them laugh again, and the moment passes. Even the way Shrek reacts, "Oh, for the love of Pete," seems to indicate that Donkey's comedy calmed him down and let the anger pass with the moment, and he settled down and answered Donkey's questions as honestly as he could. "What's your problem, Shrek? What do you have against the whole world anyway?" "Look, it's not me who has a problem, okay? It's the world who seems to have a problem with me. They take one look at me and scream, 'Ha, help, run. It's a big, stupid, ugly ogre.' They judge me before they even get to know me. That's why I'm better off alone." If, as a drunk adult, you don't tear up at this scene, you are Team Farquaad. This scene wraps up with Donkey acknowledging Shrek's pain in this moment by cutting his comedy, and offers Shrek verbal confirmation of what he's been doing since the moment they met: unconditional friendship. He sees him for who he is, not the ogre he performs or the role society has shunned him into. Shrek acknowledges this and doesn't run away. They sit together and continue their story of the stars. Oh, it's just so good. I said earlier Shrek answers Donkey's questions as honestly as he can because the last sentence implies Shrek's solitude was a choice he made, when it simply isn't. Shrek's choice was the byproduct of a world that forced him into solitude to begin with. Shrek regularly gets angry mobs at his borders, even though we know he never leaves his swamp. He's attacked on sight at worst and insulted and ran away from at best, in almost every circumstance of his life. That level of ostracization is destructive to the psyche, even in ogres, and Shrek's coping mechanism for this constant stress was to double down into the stereotypes placed on him by the fairy tales of others, because at least then the world's judgment and fear of him would make sense. Shrek's swamp is his safe haven. It's a patch of ugly land that no one wants just like him. And since no one ever dares to get close to his swamp, he never has to perform the act of the ogre. He can simply live. Now, with all of this in mind, knowing every interaction with anyone before Donkey has been that of fear and hatred, knowing the swamp is his safe haven, let's remember the scene where Shrek discovers the camp of refugees, both outside and then inside his house. And let's remember their first reaction to him. It was fear. In his swamp, he is judged, and now he asks to act the part of the ogre. Poor Shrek. And with this new perspective of the scene, we can understand why Shrek instantly went to Duloc a little better. It's much more than a swamp, just like he is much more than an ogre. Shrek is such an interesting character, and we will definitely look more at him and how much he has grown when we talk about Shrek too. But for now, I want to look at Donkey and how he connects to the theme of don't judge a book by its cover. Well, given that we just talked about Shrek's revelation and how he doesn't want to be judged for the fairy tales people tell of him, you would think I would connect Shrek to this theme, but let me explain myself. All of our MCs in this movie represent this theme in some form. Fiona is the tongue in cheek version. She is literally a princess by day, ogre by night. She is a badass fighter, capable of barehandedly beating several full grown men who have weapons by herself. And Shrek explains the theme to the audience in the scene we just talked about. He is the embodiment and poster boy of this theme, but Donkey is the subtle one, and it's the subtleness that makes him more interesting to talk about. But before we get into that, I want to talk about how Donkey's character is working for this movie's thesis. Donkey is designed after the archetypal animal companion, and the comparison is obviously apt for his base design. He is a donkey named Donkey, just like the valiant steed of a hero would only be referred to as Steed, or by a name like Victory or Courage, or some other very on the nose type of name that represents one of the hero's virtue. His name being a synonym for jackass is a genius subversion of the trope, because being a jackass would be a virtue for Shrek. His name and his design also allows the characters in the movie to say ass a handful of times without raising the PG rating, which helps the producers walk the line between adult and kids movie. Donkey is the comedy relief, a trait more commonly seen in the princess animal companion, but it's still common enough for the prince. Donkey can talk, meaning he is magical in some capacity. And what's more fairy tale than a valiant, magical talking horse? Can we see how Donkey being a donkey is enough by itself to subvert the expectations of a typical fairy tale? But this subversion goes even deeper. Having a comedy relief character in any comedy movie seems a bit redundant. Like, why are they there? To break any dramatic tension with a well timed quip? Most of these movies don't need that. Their main characters are funny enough as is, and the movie's tension is never so hard that a comedic moment is necessary. Hey Hey and Olaf are the biggest sinners in this regard. Olaf at least has some touching moments. He could talk and therefore make a good pun or say something absurd for a kid's movie like, I've been impaled. But him being there doesn't add anything to the movie. The same goes for and is multiplied by 3,000 for Hey Hey. That bird is so unneeded. The movie would be unchanged if he wasn't there, and Moana's character would only be more interesting if she had to eat him on the boat. Donkey is the furthest thing from the pointless comedy relief animal companion, even though just taking a shallow look at him would make you think he is. So let's unpack this. First, Donkey being a donkey is already a subversion of the typical fairy tale valiant steed trope. We talked about this, but the movie itself points out how its own irony in Fiona's tower when Fiona, in the midst of her fairy tale delusions, comments on Shrek's noble steed and he laughs at her assumptions. Second, Shrek is only a kids' movie because of its comedy and colors, which means constant comedy relief is necessary for the movie to walk its tightrope, thus giving credence to the addition of a comedy relief character. Mushu from Disney's Mulan, ironically also played by Eddie Murphy, is another example of the needed comedy relief character so a kids' movie can keep its kid-friendly nature. Without these characters' jokes and energy, their respective movies would be considered too grim for a typical kid-friendly rating. Now to look at Donkey's deeper character and how this proves he is not your typical animal companion. I said it earlier. Donkey is an integral reason for the emotional growth of both of our two-legged MCs. We just discussed how he pushed Shrek in the scene with the stars. The first time Donkey pushed Shrek's buttons to get him to open up. When they first met, it's Donkey's persistence and good-natured reaction to Shrek's anger that made Shrek open his swamp to him in the first place. Donkey does not do these things to be a pest and be funny for the audience. Those are just byproducts of the amazing writing in this movie. No, he pisses off Shrek because when Shrek gets frustrated, he has two mechanisms he falls back on: anger and avoidance. We talked about how his anger doesn't work on Donkey, and when Shrek ignores Donkey, Donkey only gets more annoying. So when these mechanisms don't work, Shrek's left with only the truth of himself as the shield, and that's exactly what Donkey is after to begin with. While Shrek is the embodiment of don't judge a book, Donkey is the embodiment of friendship. He operates the way he does so he can find out more about his friends. Maybe it's because he believes that the best way to be friends is to be vulnerable with each other. Maybe he understands that his friends are suffering from their respective traumas and he wants to help them confront these feelings and work with them. I don't know. But I think the latter option might be a little bit too devious for Donkey. But we can see how intentional Donkey's behavior is because he can switch it up when he needs to, like when he's with Fiona. He's gentle and kind and listens to Fiona's worries, then reassures her that he doesn't care what she looks like by sitting close to her as she cries. I can see the argument that Donkey plays too hard into the wingman role here, prioritizing Shrek in the conversation and offering only solution to Fiona's problems instead of just truly listening. I don't think anyone could or would argue that Donkey has ever been a good listener. However, I want to believe that Donkey is shrewd enough to have seen how close Shrek and Fiona had gotten in the past few days, and how well they work together, or else he wouldn't have pushed for the romance to begin with. Donkey also has plot relevance, which a lot of animal companions can't say. It's because of his jackass behavior that he learns why Shrek pushes Fiona into Farquaad's arms, and then he tries to fix the misunderstanding. And he does this while keeping Fiona's secret, which I think shows how Donkey is truly looking out for both of his friends' best interests. Along with snapping Shrek out of his angry stupor, Donkey is the reason why Dragon is there to take Shrek to Duloc to stop the wedding. He's also the reason why Dragon is there to eat Farquaad at the end, allowing Shrek and Fiona to have their happy ending. Unlike a lot of animal companions, Shrek wouldn't be Shrek without Donkey, both the movie and the character. By random, I asked my AI search engine who the best character in Shrek was and why. I was expecting a non committal answer, or for it to answer with the title character and a list of their attributes like it would for any other similar question, but it answered Donkey. So if that counts for as further evidence to Donkey's importance, there's that. Donkey's contribution to the movie, its characters, and its plot is a demonstration of the movie's thesis of not being your typical fairy tale. Donkey takes the usual role of animal companion and elevates it to something other than the typical useless comedic relief. He's emotionally intelligent and instantly gets his two legged companions better than they get themselves and helps them grow and change. He is ultimately the reason why they get together and have their happily ever after. Donkey continues to be a central part of Shrek's emotional growth throughout Shrek 2 and 3, but we'll talk more about that later. Now, I want to talk about our very tragic princess, Fiona. Fiona's conflict is yet another brilliant move made by the writers of this movie. Her plight on the surface seems so stereotypical and shallow. Cursed to be a hideous ogre every night, what Prince Charming would ever want a princess who is ugly? How will she ever get her happily ever after? What is a girl to do? But that's not really her biggest struggle. Her real curse is the story she's been told since she was old enough to say the words true love's first kiss. Fiona is a textbook example of a child who's been brainwashed by the adults in her life to believe in something that isn't real. She was told that to achieve a perfect life and to find her happily ever after, a practical goal in this world of fairy tales and magic, she needed to be the princess that others expected her to be. She's to sit in her tower and wait for someone to save her, and that person must be her true love. She's taught to deny half of herself because it doesn't fit the ideal princess image. She's told that as long as she does this, her life will be perfect. And she believes it, and she wants it so badly that it truly traps her. It's so clever to have the princess's real struggle be she believes too deeply in the concept of being a princess and having a happily ever after. And again, we see the writers take the concept and tropes of fairy tales and twist them completely. Fiona is hard sipping that princess Kool-Aid when Shrek first meets her. And he even comments on how much she subscribes to the fairy tale nonsense and how weird it is. This girl is so caught up in her perfect fairy tale rescue, she stops Shrek from getting her out of the tower several times because he's not rescuing her right, and even reprimands him for not slaying the dragon first. He points out that all the skeletons around her are from the knights who tried to rescue her right, and she becomes like a camera lens stuttering. This marks the first time her fairy tale perspective is being challenged, and it's a powerful illustration that what she's always been told may not be entirely accurate, and it's hard for her to process. And then, after escaping the tower, she finds out that Shrek is an ogre, and her fairy tale ending looks even cloudier. This isn't right. Prince Charming was supposed to rescue her. He was supposed to kiss her, and she would be safe from her curse, and she could go home. Now, what is she supposed to do? Where does she go Where does her story go from here when everything else has been so wrong? This explains why Fiona sits down right outside of the volcano and insists Farquaad come get her. Fiona, despite Fiona, despite being brainwashed into this perfect princess belief, still has headstrong and willful defense mechanisms. She felt her delusions crumbling, and she responded by doubling down into them instead of facing what it could mean if the fairy tales were wrong. This dynamic between Shrek's desire to be seen outside of what the stories say about him and Fiona's desire to have the happily ever after those same stories always promised her is so interesting. I wish they would have had more time to talk about this in the movie together, along with all of Fiona's traumas. But this is a kids' movie from the early 2000s, so I'm just glad she is a one note fairy tale princess. Fiona demonstrates again how deep in the fairy tale saw she is moments later when Shrek is carrying her and Donkey is asking her for dating advice. He asks essentially how he can let Dragon down easily because he wasn't feeling her. She responds with, well, duh, just tell her she isn't your true love. Everyone knows how important true love is. She says it like it's gospel. Worse, she says it like it's the most common sense answer everyone would give. Like everyone knows how important true love is and what it means. Also, I love the irony of how she's sitting on her little high horse in this moment, believing she knows what true love is because of all the stories she read about it. Meanwhile, she's claiming Donkey and Dragon aren't true loves, while also making a jab at Shrek because she thinks they're not true loves, and she's dead fucking wrong on both accounts. Then, after listening in on Shrek and Donkey's conversation that first night, Fiona starts to behave differently toward Shrek. It's so unfortunate that her character development wasn't better explored on screen like Shrek's was, because of because of that, this next small section will be more speculation than the rest of this analysis already is. Looking at what Fiona heard that night, and given her cheeky stab at Shrek about not judging a book by its cover, implies that Fiona is trying to give that grace to Shrek. I could see the argument that her mood shift, knowing her penchant for delusion, indicates she's developed a savior persona. Like, look at me, I'm a princess. I'm not like other people. I won't judge you for how you look. I'm above that, which isn't healthy for her or Shrek. But I want to argue that instead, she sat with herself after hearing Shrek's confession that night and realized how differently she would be acting and feeling if she treated Shrek like he was anyone else instead of the monster like the stories say he is. I think her change is genuine and deep. She starts acting like a person who is free and happy, who sees her happily ever after again. She's singing and cooking breakfast. She has a hero. She has a lord who will break the curse. This does mean that she's still romanticizing her trauma, which isn't healthy, but this offers a more authentic start to her and Shrek's relationship than the other option. I also think she uses this change of perspective as a springboard for her journey to self acceptance. And that's the theme I connect Fiona to self acceptance. Her entire journey from the moment she learns that Shrek is an ogre is about learning how to love her ogre side. A part of her ultimate desire, the reason why she is so caught up in the fairy tale nonsense, is because she wants to be truly loved. She desires this because she intrinsically understands that her parents could not have truly loved her and still put her in that tower. There's more there, but not until Shrek 2. And in real life, in order to love and be loved in return, you have to understand yourself. You have to learn about the parts of you you can't change and 5 ways to love and accept those parts of you. So you know what it feels like when someone is loving you how you need to be loved. That's why self acceptance is so important to Fiona's journey. Yes, Shrek also represents this theme. He has to learn and accept that he might be the type of person that wants romance and friendship in his life. Even Donkey represents the theme because he has to learn and accept that he might like dragons romantically and sexually in order to progress the plot of the movie. But seeing as Fiona has a lot of brainwashing to work through to get to self acceptance, that kind of trumps transitioning out of the loner monster archetype and learning how to love Dragon Kawega. Jokes aside, while Fiona's effect on Shrek's character development is undercut by Donkey's effect on Shrek, Shrek's effect on Fiona's development doesn't share that problem. Donkey does sit with her in the end, and it's this interaction that is the final push for her delusions to fully crumble, as she begins to accept that she might love an ogre, and therefore she can love herself. But Shrek helping her explore her ogre side, whether they understand it as such or not, opens a door for Fiona. By being gross with her and blatantly loving and praising her strengths and abilities, all while she's in her princess form, the form that really shouldn't be acting like that, at least according to the fairy tales she's always been told, Shrek allows her the chance to love those things about herself too, instead of constantly having to suppress them for the sake of the princess image. It's interesting, even though Shrek and Fiona's backstory start at opposite ends of the spectrum in social status and particular expectations, their journeys surprisingly parallel each other. They both are in similar positions by the time they meet. Shrek lives a solitary bachelor life, one he pretends he wants. So much so, he would fight to keep up the lifestyle because it fits the role of the ogre. Fiona is forced in, Fiona is forced into solitude by the expectations of her curse and accepts this role because it's the role of the cursed princess. These parallels continue as they, throughout the course of the movie, grow into individuals who understand they are fundamentally different from the roles they were born into. And they come to learn they are willing to shed these fairy tale expectations. It's their common end goal that they reach through moments of growing together and finding out what it's like to be themselves with someone else that gives their 48-hour romance some weight. This again exemplifies the movie's thesis, as any normal fairy tale would allow the flippant excuse of true love to answer any simple questions about chemistry or emotional understanding. To wrap up Fiona's section, I want to talk about the second hidden devastating scene. This is where we kind of have to look at the second movie to understand how devastating this scene is. So, in Fiona's childhood bedroom, Shrek finds and reads her diary. Given the toys and the art style in her diary, we can guess that Fiona is younger than 10 when she was sent to the tower, and she's most likely in her mid to late 20s when Shrek rescues her. And I won't argue the physical logistics of Fiona's isolation and abuse. Her parents are the king and queen of this world. They could and probably did make sure Fiona was well fed, clothed, and educated. Some could argue they did this out of love. Others could say they did this to make sure she still looked the part of the princess when she was eventually rescued. I won't argue for them right now. They were brainwashed as well. We'll get to that in the second movie. Um, but now, with that out of the way, her parents' emotional abuse, that was real. Fiona hasn't been home, hasn't hugged her parents, slept in her own bed, or seen her friends in at least 15 years. She was promised as a child that as long as she finds her true love and she breaks her curse, she gets to come home. What an impossible task for a child to achieve, especially given that one of her expectations is to sit in her tower until her true love comes and gets her. Under the curse of the princess status, she isn't allowed any agency to find her true love herself. So the thing about getting older is that you don't lose the younger versions of yourself. You still have a 10-year-old you rattling around inside your head and heart. You still carry their hopes and expectations on life, even if their voices have gotten quieter over the years. Now, with this in mind, let's look at the scene of the curse being broken. Can you imagine how devastated young Fiona was in the moment that the curse was broken and she was still an ogre? Yes, the fairy tales were kind of right. She found her true love. She's going to get a happy ending. However, you know she thought about the promise to return home and how that will never be able to happen now. I think how I think how she is portrayed in this scene indicates the artist took this into consideration. When Shrek stands her up, she is wide awake. Her eyes are slightly panicked. We have seen how well these animators can put expressions on an ogre's face. We know if she were meant to look like she was being pulled up from a fainting spell, she would have. I don't think she was ever unconscious from the curse being broken. I think she chose to lay on the ground to hide herself, to give herself a moment to grieve the last hope of her younger self being shattered. Fiona's story is so tragic. First, she was brainwashed and enslaved by the ideologies of fairy tales. Then, she was put into isolation for almost 2 decades. And then, her one way back home is lost forever when she finds her true love. Like, what a catch 22. She gets her happy ending, but her path to get there was dark and full of uncertainty. We'll see more of the horrors she had to contend with growing up in Shrek 2, but for now, let's take let's talk about all the set piece characters and our villain, Lord Farquaad. First, I'll explain what I mean when I say a set piece character. In literature, there are three types of characters: primary, or the main character; secondary, or the side characters; and tertiary, which is the group I'm referring to. In the case of Shrek, Donkey, and Fiona would be primary characters. Farquaad is the sole secondary character, while all the refugees and Knights of Duloc would act as tertiary characters. As set piece characters, the refugees and knights help contribute minimally to the plot, but add a lot when it comes to reinforcing the thesis of the movie and help create the fine line between adult and kids' humor. The knights are not valiant, kind, or honorable, all traits we associate with fairy tale knights. Instead, they are seen imprisoning magical characters, giving over small handfuls of gold to the citizens who did the work of capturing the characters for them. They run from Shrek, even leaving one of their own behind, and they only have the courage to fight him when it's 20 to 1, and they still lose. Seeing these details in the movie, it's clear how much time and effort went into the script so that every aspect of it reinforces the idea of not your typical fairy tale. The refugees offer a little bit more in their roles as set pieces, and a handful of them even graduate to secondary characters in the second movie. I think the refugees were the creative framework for how the rest of the movie was going to play off of the idea of not your typical fairy tale. And Aaron Warner said it best. He said, "We basically took every fairy tale in the book and turned it on its side. Nothing is sacred." And that nothing is sacred idea really shows when we see Geppetto selling Pinocchio, his son, and Peter Pan selling Tinkerbell, his one way ticket back to Neverland. They also help Farquaad lay the barest amount of world building that this movie offers. Even in later Shrek movies, the world feels more like a sandbox full of specifically built landmarks than a place with concrete borders and environments. And while it makes sense why they did this in this movie, they were an up and coming studio making a movie about a donkey and a green monster thing. They didn't know if they were going to get a Shrek 2. But I like that they kept this up for the later movies. It feels like a land in a fairy tale, where winter and summer can exist in neighboring mountains. I'll get more into the world building when we talk about Shrek 2, as there's more to go off of then. But now let's look at our villain. As I said, Farquaad is the only secondary character in Shrek. He has more motivations and ambitions than the refugees, and offers more meaning to the plot of the story without being its centerpiece. And though he is vile, he's not a great villain towards Shrek and Fiona. Yes, he offers the circumstances for the characters to come together, and more importantly, to his villain role, he acts as an antithesis to Shrek by being things we normally associate with the hero role. He's wealthy, a noble, hell, he's even a human. But he's deeply vain, ambitious, violent, and insecure about his height, a volatile combination. It's this insecurity that makes his struggle similar to Shrek's. If he could accept himself for how he looks and love himself regardless, he wouldn't need the approval of others to feel confident. And if he had real confidence instead of playing a part, he probably wouldn't have needed to develop his toxic and dangerous coping mechanism, that of seeking control and perfection around him. It's through this control over others that Farquaad hopes to gain control over himself, but it's a negative feedback loop. Because people fear him instead of loving and respecting him, he will always be paranoid that they are still mocking him behind his back. He's become a snake eating its own tail. The more he seeks control, the more paranoid he becomes about having control, which ultimately leads us to the plot of the movie. His duality with Shrek is similar to Shrek and Fiona's duality, because like Fiona, Farquaad starts off in a better position in life than Shrek. However, unlike our heroes, Farquaad's journey has ended by the beginning of the movie. He's committed to the need of the He's committed to the need of control to find self-confidence, and went down a road of selfishness and moral bankruptcy. And while the dichotomy is really interesting to look at, as for acts against our heroes, his opposition towards them doesn't really happen until the last 5 minutes of the movie, and then he's promptly eaten by a dragon. And to wrap up Farquaad's section, I want to talk about the song Welcome to Duloc and his animatronic box, because it offers a good example of Farquaad's ideals. Welcome to Duloc, such a perfect town. Here we have some rules, let us lay them down. Don't make waves, stay in line, and we'll get along fine. Duloc is a perfect place. There is no war in Bossing Say. This song emphasizes Farquaad's desire for perfection, and it gives us a clear example of what perfection looks like to him. A place where everyone looks the same, a place where his role is absolute and unquestioned, a place without the chaos of fairy tale characters. The song is brilliantly written, too, as the first verse works for making Farquaad's ambitions known, and the second verse of the song works towards hiding the adult themes behind an adult joke. Please keep off of the grass, shine your shoes, wipe your face. The replacement of words is obvious enough that even most children will be able to understand the joke, and the danger that Farquaad's ambitions suggest gets lost with a laugh. Farquaad was the most difficult for me to relate to the movie's thesis. It was so easy to mark him off as the generic villain who was only there to aid in the movie's adult humor. His short stature, his cruelty, his weird little boner with the magic mirror. How could it be anything else but the vessel for the sneaky, cruder humor? But then it hit me. I was looking at his motivations through the lens of someone living in 2024, not the 90s. While a kid's movie While a kid's movie villain being an egomaniac with ideologies reminiscent of white supremacy might seem almost cliche in 2024, in 2001, it was little explored territory. Most movie most movie villains before Shrek were either based on real world assholes like industrial tycoons, controversial directors, and world leaders the movie directors didn't like, or they were in line with dark forces like the devil, or an ambiguous equivalent to the devil. I'm not saying Shrek innovated this villain archetype, but what they explored with Farquaad lends itself well to their idea of creating a movie that wasn't your typical fairy tale. The writing of this movie is so tight. It's hard to pinpoint a wasted scene that didn't aid directly to the plot, its hidden adult humor, or the thesis of the movie. Even its villain and background characters fully emphasize the director's goals, and it's wonderful. Shrek has so many layers to it. Forgive me. I said I was done, but it's such a fitting description. I remember watching this when I was a kid and feeling nothing but silly joy. And now as an adult, and after writing this script, I can see how much deeper it really is. Shrek is certainly a kid's movie. It can be enjoyed to its full extent by children of all ages. That makes it a great movie in of itself. But the amount of detail and care the writers put into the script to make it so well thought out and deep, while still keeping it funny and touching and fun, that's the reason why this movie is still held in high regard today. Shrek is a movie that confronts the idea of stereotypes, undermines tropes, and turns the viewer's expectations on its side. It's a movie that explores themes of friendship and self acceptance. It's about challenging prejudice and extreme forms of parody. The characters are dynamic, fun, and profoundly interesting. Everyone offers themselves to the plot of the movie. It's balanced between adult and kids' humor and its thesis of not being your typical fairy tale. The directors went into this movie with the goal of creating a unique fairy tale that turned every convention and expectation on its side. And they wanted to create an experience that walked a fine line between adult and kids' humor. And it did such a good job, it won the studio an Academy Award. Its CGI style, themes, and humor would go on to influence movies like Hoodwinked and Chicken Little. The success of the movie allowed for 3 more Shrek movies, 2 Puss in Boots movies, several short films, and holiday specials, even a Shrek 4D experience in Orlando studios. There is even talk of a Shrek 5 circulating as I write this script. The creators at DreamWorks didn't know the legacy they were creating when they went into Shrek. They simply had a goal for its creation. They fought to stick to this goal, left no scene unpolished and unimportant, and it paid off spectacularly. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was an amazing time writing this script. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I went into this project, but it ended up being so much fun. Everything I learned about this movie through my research and writing, it felt like I was unlocking a door in a fantastical mansion. It was so exciting and cool. This is my first video analysis, so please let me know if you liked the video, what you enjoyed and didn't, so I can make my next one even better. By the time this video is up, I should be in the middle of writing my script for Shrek 2, so keep a lookout. Anyways, I'll finish this story later.